Hi and welcome to this episode of Viking.TV. Now my name is Ellen Marie Næss. I'm museum lecturer at the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo. But as you can see, we are obviously not in the museum today. We have taken the trip down to the most exciting excavation in 100 years. And with me we have archaeologist Løchsen Rødsrud, and he is project manager for this excavation, and he will tell us everything about this exciting project. And Christian,
yeah.
Where are we?
We are now outside the city of Halden in southern Norway, almost on the border to Sweden actually. And behind us you can see the great Gjell mound. It's the second largest mound in Norway. This mound is not what we're gonna take a look at because it does not contain a Viking ship. Still, it is a mound that has attracted attention upon the years earlier, and an archaeologist called Erling Johansen excavated it back in 1968-1969. It's a huge mound, but it's with a very simple cremation burial. Only 1.75 grams of burnt bone was found inside, accompanied by a half amber bead. This mound is probably built in the migration period, some 300 years before the Viking Age burial that took place some 100 meters to the west of it. And but now I would like to take you inside the tent and take a look at the ship burial. Now we're inside the tent, and behind me you can actually see the contour of the ship. This is more dark in color than the subsoil around it, and you can see the shape of the ship with the stern just behind me, the northern stern. The ship is 19.5 meters long and about 4 meters wide. This is approximately the same size as the ships we know from before that are exhibited in the Viking Age Museum. And the size would be very close to the Oseberg ship, for example. The main thing is that this is not as well preserved as the Oseberg or the Gjellestad. It's very much more worn down, and we will never be able to exhibit it in the same way as the Viking ships that we have before. But using modern archaeological excavation methods, we will still be able to tell a lot about this ship and make a full reconstruction of it. If you follow me, we can take a closer look at some of the details of the ship. And firstly, we can take a look at how the archaeologists are working. We are digging from some platforms that you can see beside the ship. This is very important because we don't want to tread down on the ship. It's very vulnerable, and we need to excavate without deteriorating the contents of the situation. And here are some really important details that we're working with now. You can see the ship in a dark color, but it's not actually the ship. What we're looking down at here are turfs that were made, that at some point made up the mound that were on top of the ship. And these turfs have of course been placed onto the deck of the ship and used to build a 40-meter wide mound on top of it. Over the years, the mound has put pressure on the ship while it's degenerated and then collapsed into the lower sections of the pit that were used to place the ship in, and then all these turfs have sunk down onto the ship's deck, and we have to remove all these turfs before we come down to the ship improper, and of course also any possible remains of the burial. If you look to my left, you can see our conservator working with the remains of the ship. Here we're actually down onto the strakes or the planks of the ship, the inside of the ship, and he's now using a little brush to clean it, to clean the soil away from it. And as you can see, this wood is totally worn down. Originally, it's been like 2.5 centimeters thick, these planks of the ship. They're now down to just like 1 millimeter. So it's very worn down, and we have to be very careful when we excavate it. There are many other details to look into, and one of them is that this ship has also been plundered or at least disturbed at some point. This is a situation that we know from the Oseberg and the Gjellestad as well. These large mounds were often plundered, but there might still be quite a lot of interesting artifacts left inside, although some of them probably are removed. As you can see behind me, we have a plundering situation also here. This is actually the remains of shovel cuts into the subsoil, and they are like 1/2 meter outside the ship. And they're beginning from 1/2 meter outside the ship and then working its way into the ship, the ship's middle section. Of course, they knew that this is where the possible grave chamber would have been. So it's quite an obvious place to go in and look for artifacts. At this point in the excavation, it is one type of artifacts that we find a lot of, and that are ship nails. You can see them underneath me here. At this point, we are not down in the burial site. We only see the nails on the side of the ship. And if you take a closer look down here, they come at certain intervals, and they have, of course, been used to hold the planks of the ship together. And if you look underneath this box, we have a situation with one very beautiful nail here, the nail's head outside the ship and the rivet on the inside. So the planks would have been in the middle here, which are now only seen as mineralized tree. When we excavate further into the ground, we will also find the next set of planks with its accompanying rivets. These are all measured in 3D at the hale and at the rivet section, and then we get a quite accurate information about the thickness of the planks. Also important when documenting this ship is that we do everything in 3D. We make photogrammatical models of all the layers within the ship. At first we uncovered the topsoil, of course. That would be the first model, and then we remove one layer of turfs, make another model, and so forth. And after doing this, we could actually re-excavate the ship in a year if we want to do it, and make sure that all the interpretations that were made were accurate. And it could also actually be used in a museum sequence for the audience to actually re-excavate the ship themselves. Here you can see the contour of the ship quite visibly. It comes out in dark color next to the much lighter subsoil. And on the sides we find the ship nails that we have marked with these pirate flags, mostly just not to step on them, of course, but they will be measured in when we excavate further into the process. There are some other details to look into. Once again, you can see that it is the turfs in the middle of the ship that are preserved on the top, and we will come down on the ship details as we excavate further down. This is a quite visible feature that you can see going across the ship. It's a sorry situation in many ways. It is the plow from modern agriculture going across the grave and cutting into it. So it's of course destroyed the top layer of the ship. So what we have is more or less the ship from the water level and down. We are missing the upper strakes. Here we can take a look at a closer look at one of the ship nails. It is actually just in the level between the topsoil and the ship in itself. So it's actually come loose, and we can lift it up and take a closer look at it. The rivet is still in the underground, but here we can see how it looks like. This would be the head of the nail, and this is the nail in itself, and there would be some mineralized tree going across it. It's very broken down. There is almost no iron left in it, just mineralized iron, and if we would X-ray it, it's probably hollow. This is of course a burial situation, and one of the most elaborate you can find in the Viking Age. People buried in ships do not come in big numbers. There are like something like 15 ship burials across the world from this period, and it must be a person from the upper echelons of society that has been buried here. We wouldn't know yet if it's a man or a woman. There could actually be both. In the Oseberg were 2 women, in the Gjellestad ship 1 man. Maybe this is a double burial for both sexes, I wouldn't know yet. But this is one of the things we really want to find out in this excavation. Being a burial, there has been a lot of preparations going on before putting the ship into the ground. Firstly, one must have dug a great hole to place the ship within. The ship must have been sailed up in this bay behind us, probably sailed partially up the river that goes along the southern border of the site, along the western border of the site. Then it's probably been pulled across the field on top of timbers and placed within this pit that were made for it. After that, they prepared the ground for the burial, and many things must have taken place, and many people would have been gathered at such a special occasion. Probably one placed a lot of artifacts along with the dead. These may have been placed delicately around, or they may be part of a more destructive ritual, as we can see them from, for example, in the Oseberg. In the Oseberg and the Gjellestad burials, many animals were sacrificed and beheaded and placed both within the ship and also outside the ship. These are things that we believe might also have happened here at Gjellestad. The preservative conditions of such animals might not be as good here, so we are not sure if we would find the bones, but at least I believe we would find some very degenerated bones that we, with modern technological equipment, could still find a lot out about them. Things like ancient DNA might actually be possible, even if the bones are quite worn down. As I told you, we mostly find nails, and so far we have only found like one other important artifact, and this is this part of a bead that I'm holding in my hand here. This was found in the topsoil just above the keel, the northern stern section. We cannot actually be sure if this relates to the ship or it's from one of the other overplowed mounds of the field, but still it is a bead from the Viking Age. As you can see, it has 2 eyes on it. We call them eye beads, and they are typically made in the Eastern Mediterranean or the Middle East and exported to northern territories. So this has clearly come from afar and indicates that this is a site with international contacts. The ship burial is part of a really rich cultural landscape. There are several mounds in the area, probably a trade and production site, and if we go outside, I'll show you closer. Now we are on top of the Gjell mound, and we can take a look at the landscape around the ship burial. The burial would have been placed within the tent to the left of me, to the northwest. But this is part of a really much larger grave field. The big mastodon in the area would of course be the Gjell mound, being here from the 5th century. But once again to the left, around our small barracks, would have been something like 15 more burial sites, burial mounds. These were partially removed in the late 18th century by the farmers because they were in the way of modern agriculture, but still there are some mounds remaining. 3 large mounds are still in the woods up there. There is a big bota stone by the farm, and behind me is another important thing. You can see the highway going across. This is probably the old way of traveling the landscape. This road would take you to Sweden going east. But behind me you would have seen the water. If we go back to the Viking Age, the water level should have been raised 3.5 to 4.5 meters. Then the sea would have come as a bay into the landscape, some 200 meters behind, away from the farm that you can see across the highway. This is called Gjellmongen. And at the sea line of this farm, we have also found a lot of metal detector finds. These are mostly coins and weight, and probably should be associated with a trading and production site associated with Viking Age activities in the area. There is a certain history to how this ship burial was found. Back in 2016, the archaeologists from the county, they made a little test surveying of the area, and it was back then that they found the first, the remains of the first mounds on sites that now are overplowed. Then in 2017, the farmer here at Gjellestad, he applied for draining the field because it's quite wet. This caused the county archaeologists to alarm. They knew that the Gjell mound must have been an important place in the area, and they knew that there were several other mounds as well. And then they ordered geophysical surveying of the sites. And this was made in 2018, and the news of course went worldwide with the discovery of the ship burial. Still, the ship burial is just a part of a whole. As I mentioned before, there were some 15 other burial mounds, and also quite a few remains of settlements. In the geophysical surveys, quite a lot of post holes were indicated, and these would have made up structures for longhouses. There are something like 5 of them, and they should be connected to the grave field. Though they don't mix. The grave field, the grave mounds are, and the settlement seems to be divided by a fence actually. A long fence going across the field here, with all the farms on the western side of the fence and the grave fields on the eastern. Okay, the ship burial. There are many things we are setting out to find out about this ship. One thing is who was buried within it. The other thing is the details of the ship. We still don't know what kind of ship we are talking about. I'd say that it's most probably a ship for sailing, as is known from the Oseberg, the Gjellestad and the Tuna ships. But we still don't know that because we don't know if it has a mast. In a test excavation last year, we were able to find parts of the keel, and we sampled it. And what was puzzling about the keel was that it's very small and slender compared to the Oseberg and the Gjellestad ships, meaning that this ship quite clearly has other abilities. Maybe it's a ship for rowing, but it certainly is too early to tell. But when we come into the center of the ship, we need to find out if it has a mast. Another thing one might wonder about is what kind of ship we are talking about. Is it a warship? Is it a ship for trade? I would say it's most probably a warship, because trading ships or ships for transporting large amounts of cargo, they become a little bit wider, and we only have them from the 10th century and on. This is probably earlier, and I would say that it's a ship for transporting men, and therefore most probably warriors. When doing the test excavation last year, we took a sample of the keel, as I told you. This was quite important because it could be used for two very important purposes. One of them is telling the age of the ship. So we sent it to a dendrochronology expert, counting the earrings of the tree. And she could tell that this particular piece of the keel had been growing as a living tree from 603 to 724. So this is when the tree was alive. Then again, we must add a few years on top of that to see to manage to know when it was cut down. This was probably, it could not have been earlier than the 733. But then again, we need to add more years to the situation, because the keel, it has of course been cut to make a keel and to have its abilities, and then you would have cut off some centimeters of the outside of the wood. If you cut off something like 1 or 2 centimeters, it could represent something like 100 years in time, actually, because the earrings, they are only 0.5 millimeters wide. So if you cut off a few centimeters, you can lose many years. So then we just carefully say that it's somewhere between 800 and 900 approximately. If we find more pieces of wood, that we certainly hope that we will, then we can narrow this date frame much more in. This has been done with the Oseberg and the Gjellestad, for example. So we actually know that the Oseberg is from exactly 820 and the Gjellestad ship from around 900. We'll see how narrow we can get here with the Gjellestad ship. Another important thing about dendrochronology is that you can find the provenance of the timber in the ship. And when you do so, you compare it to other known finds of wood. And the two most comparable parallels to this keel from the Gjellestad was the Oseberg ship and one of the small boats that were inside the Gjellestad ship. And they were both built in Western Norway, we know. So most probably this Gjellestad ship was also built somewhere in the southwestern Norway and then sailed up here in the Oslo fjord before it was buried. And that is probably because the shipbuilders of Western Norway were really great. The other very important find that we could read from the sample that we took last year was the preservative condition of this find. It was taken to a lab and then examined very closely by a specialist in decaying wood, and she could see that it's rapidly being eaten by fungi as we speak, actually. There are fungi coming from all directions, eating its way into the keel, and it's a soft rot process where it's deteriorating day by day, and it is actually no time to lose. If we are to find out who is buried here, and it's important, of course, for the dissemination and also for the research on Viking Age, we need to excavate it now before it's too late, before we lose, before it's too late, and before we come as far that we cannot see anything anymore. When the government decided to fund us with money for doing this excavation, we knew that this is going to be a one-of-a-kind situation. It's 100 years ago since a similar situation was excavated in Norway with the Oseberg in 1904. So there are many generations of our archaeologists never being able to go in and excavate a ship mound like this. So this is something that you're going to remember for the rest of your career. It's going to be one for the books. All of the persons that are working in this excavation project are very lucky to be here, I'd say, because it's a very, very special situation. As a project manager, I think I'm going to be remembered for doing this. It's going to be my career highlight in a way. But then again, it's a very special situation. We are 11 persons working here today. We all live together, renting 2 houses quite locally here and living here during the weeks. Then we go home in the weekends and spend time with our families again. And we are in a way a small community fixated on this excavation for 5 months now. We are still at a quite early stage of the excavation. We are digging the top layers of the ship. This is due to the preservative situation. We want to excavate the least best preserved parts first, and then we will excavate slowly, layer by layer, and come on to better preserved bits. We know from last year that the keel is preserved as one hole down at the bottom of the pit that the ship was placed within. And then again, we don't know how many other parts of the ship that are preserved as well as making us able to lift it up in one piece. For certain, it is important that we take what is still left of wood in for conservation, because it will not survive for many years in this state that it's in. So if we leave it in the ground, it would rot away and all information will be lost forever. So we know that the keel will be at least 7 or 8 meters long, that we can see from the geophysical data set. But we hope, of course, that it will be even more pieces of wood that we can lift out in one piece and preserve fully. And when we do so, we're going to lift it up very, very slowly and document it in 3D on the site, just wash it slightly before putting it into a tank of water and transporting it into Oslo for further conservation. And this process will take many years. One of the questions many viewers probably want to know is this new ship going to be a part of the new exhibition at the Viking Age Museum that we're in the process of building? I can tell you now that there is no room for this ship in the new museum. So it's not going to be a part of the exhibition per se as a ship for people to view, but still the story of this excavation is immensely important. In many ways it changes the view on the Viking Age. It is a new ship find. You can say that it changes the power constellations across the fjord. You have 3 ships on the western side of the Oslo fjord. Now you have 2 on the eastern side. So there must have been some kind of competition going on across the fjord. So even though it's not going to be a ship to see at the museum, the story of it is important to tell for future generations to understand the Viking period as a whole.
This has been such an exciting visit, and I do hope you enjoyed it too. Please join us for the Q&A session where Christian will meet you and try to answer your questions. In the meantime, we will send you a small movie that the museum has made to show you what the work about how we take care of the items of the Viking ships found. So please use these minutes to prepare your questions and send them in to us. And Christian will meet you in 5 minutes.
Hi, so I'm Løchsen Rødsrud, project manager of the Gjellestad excavation, as you've just watched, and I'm gonna be here for some minutes answering questions, so please feel free to ask questions on the website and I'll answer them as we go along. I'll just start off with the question here from Celine at Chalfont St. Giles. She says, thank you to the Viking Ship Museum for these fantastic presentations. We've all loved the videos over the past few weeks. That's good to hear. And her question is, what are you hoping to find once you're complete? That is quite a good question, I'd say. But we're wanting to find out many things. Of course, what kind of ship this has once been. We don't know at this stage yet, but I guess, as I said in the video, it's most probably a warship, but we don't know any of the details of this ship yet. These Viking ships, they're all quite individuals. None of them are alike, and I suppose we'll find a new kind of ship with this one from Gjellestad. There are a lot of other things to look into as well. And that is how this burial took place. What kind of rituals were performed, how was the mound built, and that last thing, how the mound was built, is something we actually can look very good into at Gjellestad. This was a question that wasn't really answered when digging the Oseberg or the Gjellestad ship 100 years back. At that point, one were mostly interested in looking at what kind of ship it was and what kind of items were buried within the ship, and not so much how the mound was built atop of it. And as you saw on the video, we're excavating it turf by turf. All these turfs that were put inside the ship to build a mound on top of it. This is not something that's not been done before, and it's very important that we do it to find out how this was constructed. Of course, we want to find out as much as we can about the ritual as well. What was going on? How were the grave goods placed within the ships? Was it all neat and tidy, or were equipment destroyed? Were animals sacrificed as part of the burial, as we know from the Oseberg and the Gjellestad, for example? These are all questions that we need to look into when excavating over the next few months to come. So then we can see that Rosendo from Silver Spring in Maryland has sent us a question. What is the key significance of Gjellestad? I'd say it's pretty a bit early to tell what the key significance is, but I'm sure one of the most important things is that we have a new find of a Viking ship at all. It's been 100 years since we found one in Norway, so it's a quite rare occasion. And once you find such a place, you know that it must be part of some power structure in society of the time. We didn't know before that we had one on this side of the Oslo fjord, and now that we know that it's a real power structure placed in this area around the southern border of Norway to Sweden, and it's a counterpart to some of the ship burials that we know from the western side of the fjord in Vestfold. So there must be some kind of competition going on across the fjord, and possibly the persons buried here and the persons buried in the Oseberg or the Gjellestad, they might have lived at the same time actually. So they might have known each other. So this is really interesting. And Rosendo also asked, how is it different to the Oseberg, Gjellestad and Skudelev ships? Also too early to tell in many ways, but for sure it's going to be a different ship. It's going to have its own technical details, and it's not going to be alike the other ones. So now that, at least comparing to Norway, we have 3 very well preserved ships. That would be the Oseberg, the Gjellestad and the Tune ship. And I'd say that this one would be the 4th one that is very well documented, even though it's not as well preserved as the Oseberg and the Gjellestad and Tune, which are museum items. Based on new technological data sets, we're going to be able to excavate it so that it's manageable to do a fully operational model of it, or a copy of it, and it's going to be accurate. So Karen from San Diego says, could the ship have been ceremonial only? And I'd say yes, it can. Of course, I think a ship like the Oseberg, for example, which are so highly decorated and so beautiful, it's a ship that has, of course, sailed, but it's I think many of the items in the Osebergs were built for the ceremony itself. It's actually been built for the grave ceremony. It's too early to tell if this is the same here at Gjellestad. And for sure, it's not. It has been sailed. That we can tell, because knowing that the ship was probably built in Western Norway, it must have sailed from there up until the Oslo fjord before it was buried. Then we'll see as the excavation progresses and how this ship looks, and then we'll try to answer it more fully. But most probably it has sailed for a bit, and a ship like Gjellestad, compared to the Oseberg, it might have sailed long distances, and so it's possible for the Gjellestad to both be a ceremonial ship, but also a ship for sailing far away. We'll hopefully be able to answer that in 2 or 3 months. So then Gail from Lancaster asks, why did they bury ships? That is a good question. Burying a ship is, in a way, offering something of very high value. So in itself, it's just it could be seen as kind of a show-off that you could actually afford to bury such a thing. But it's I suppose it's not as simple as that. I think that these ships were buried with a symbolic significance. Most probably, it can be compared to something that we know from the sagas about the Skyldings, the Danish royal family. King Skjold, he came to Denmark in a ship as a baby, and probably it's kind of this royal myth that they tried to symbolize when burying people in ships. The person buried within the ship as a descendant of the royal dynasty, perhaps. So let's see. Here is a question from Alfredo in Eugene. How long will this excavation take? What will the final result be? No, I just lost it. And thank you so much, and looking forward to the presentation. Oh, yeah. How long will the excavation take? I'd say we have set out to make this in 5 months, and I certainly hope that we can make it in 5 months, and that's our plan. We have been working for 2 months now, so that means it's about 3 months left. We have a lot to do, but it's our goal to be finished in the middle of November. What the final results might be, well, again, we wouldn't know before we have come to the end, but the result must be that we have uncovered the ship, that we were able to lift out what remains of wood that can be lifted and taken in for conservation. And of course, we also will hope that we can answer who was buried within, what kind of items were laid down in the grave, what can they tell us about life in the Viking Age, who was this person buried here, and how was the mound constructed. Let's say, there's a question from Gary. In the video, you briefly showed electronic imaging of the site. Can you tell us what kind of information you get from that imaging, such as depth, soil contours, and structural features? You're referring to the ground penetrating radar images, I guess. These were very important for us because this back in 2018, when the georadar was run across the field, was the first time that we could actually tell that there was a ship in here. Interpreting the data sets are quite difficult. There was no doubt that this was a ship because the shape of it, it's so clear. And what we're curious about is how well it was preserved. Most people thought it was just an imprint of the ship, but a trial excavation back last year in 2019 actually showed that the keel was partially preserved, which we are of course very happy about, and we also hope that there will be more wood surviving in the soil than just the keel itself. Hopefully, we can find some of the strakes or the planks, and maybe also the keels and the thing supporting the mast, if this ship had a mast, which we actually don't know yet. When interpreting the geophysical data, such as the depth, as you answer, as Gary is asking, that is very, very difficult. The ground penetrating radar actually indicated that the keel was preserved down at as low as 1 meter below the ground, and that actually wasn't accurate. It's very difficult to tell the depth levels. It was preserved at 75 centimeters below ground. That is the correct answer to it now that we have started excavating. But but this data set, it's very, very important for us to calculate where to go in and make trial excavations, and also to try to pick out which areas we are to excavate first and last. So here's one from Peter in Bearsville. Compared with other Viking ships, is there something unique about this one? I'm sure it's pretty much all unique. It's not going to be a ship that is alike any of the ones that we know from before. Still, it is the size of this ship at the Gjellestad. It seems to be quite comparable to the other ships that we know before. It's somewhere in the sequence between 20 and 25 meters long, I guess. So it's quite a normal size for Viking ships. Still, I'm sure it has all different technical abilities when reconstructed, and it will have many different qualities than the other ships. We don't know yet if it's a ship for sailing or not. Maybe this is a ship only for rowing, but that is something we'll find out in a month or two. Lynn asks, why has it been 100 years since you have excavated a ship? These are quite rare finds, and most finds of Viking ships were made around 1900 or some 20 to 30 years before that, when these great mounds were still surviving. The Gjellestad ship in this area is something else. It has been overplowed, so the mound was removed at the same time as the other ships were found, but it wasn't reported in. This doesn't mean that the farmers that removed the mound actually understood that there was a ship on the site. But still, this happened in a period of time when other Viking ships were known, so they might have understood and didn't report it. We don't know yet, but it's still most mounds of these sizes have been removed, and this ship is just surviving underneath the subsoil. So it's modern technology that helped us find this ship. Without the ground penetrating radar, we wouldn't probably knew that it was there. So this is quite a rarity in itself. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, and this, I think, is the last question I'll be answering now. That is on. I'm just checking out with. Well, the top one I've answered. Okay, Miller asks, as the Vikings came to Scotland, will there be any relics from Scotland found in the diggings? I suppose there could be, but it's important. It's impossible to tell at the time. But there are quite a lot of insular finds or finds from the British Islands in Scandinavia. The Vikings went there. They brought back relics, as you ask. And if there would be a relic from this part of the world in the Gjellestad ship, that will be answered. Sorry, that's my phone going off. This we can answer in a few weeks or months, once we have excavated far enough. Also, there is one more question here. Gene from Salt Lake St. Louis asked, in the Kirk Douglas movie in which he portrayed the Viking, he was sent afloat in a Viking ship which was set on fire at his death. Is this something the Vikings actually did? Well, that is difficult to tell. We know from the saga literature that ships might have been burnt on the water, but no cremation burial on the water has ever been found. What would happen if this were to take place is that the ship would be on fire, then it would burn down onto the as far as down to the water level, and then it would sink into the water. And we haven't found such a situation before, but it might have happened. And just to round things off, the final question from Brennan, Rancho Cucamonga, California. How do I get one of those awesome jackets you're all wearing? I think you're not getting one of those. These are parts of our workwear. So, thank you all for watching. It's been my pleasure to introduce you to this ongoing excavation, and see you all.